Let us learn the chapter Sectors of Indian Economy. Human beings are engaged in various economic activities. Some of these activities are producing goods, and some others are producing services. Now, these activities are happening around us every minute as we speak. Now, how do we understand these activities? We can understand them by classification. We can classify these activities on the basis of nature of activities, and on the basis of nature of activities it can be primary sector, secondary sector, and tertiary sector. Then on the nature of employment, based on the nature of employment it can be organized sector and unorganized sector. Then it is nature of ownership. On the basis of nature of ownership, it can be public sector and private sector. When I say a sector, I refer to a group of activities. So, what about primary sector, which is the first one? This includes many activities like mining, agriculture, forestry, and fishing. In mining, we extract minerals and then it is processed. In agriculture, we grow different types of crops. In forestry, forest gives so many products apart from the woods, that is timber. In fishing, we can get protein-rich fish. So, what are we doing here? We produce goods by exploiting nature. So, it is an activity of the primary sector. Then comes the secondary sector. Now, whatever we happen to get in primary sector is further processed. Like in the mines, we extract minerals and make metals out of it. And from metal, we make automobile. In the agricultural lands, we grow cotton, and from that we make textiles. In the forestry, we grow timber, and from timber we make furniture. Again, in the fields, we grow sugar cane, and from that finally we get sugar. In all these activities, we take the raw materials and process it. So, the secondary sector covers activities in which natural products are changed into other forms. It is done through ways of manufacturing that we associated with industrial activity. Now we understand these two activities in two sectors better by distinguishing them. When I say primary sector, it involves extraction and production of natural resources, whereas in the secondary sector, the same products that we happen to get in the primary sector is processed. So it processes natural resources. Then primary sector provides raw materials to the secondary sector, whereas the secondary sector converts raw materials provided by primary activities into finished goods or semi-finished goods. Primary sector is dependent on secondary sector to speed up production because If you want agricultural tools and implements, it is only secondary sector who can provide. Whereas the secondary sector, which is dependent on primary sector for supply of raw materials, take for an example of textile mill or a sugar mill, they all depend on agriculture for raw material. A greater dependence on primary sector indicates underdeveloped economy, and a shift of economic activities from primary to secondary sectors indicates a developing economy. Examples of primary sectors are agriculture, mining, and forestry. And examples of secondary sector are the manufacturing industries and construction. Then we come to the tertiary sector. Tertiary sectors are the activities that help in the development of the primary and secondary sectors. Because whether it is in agriculture or industries, they require transport, they require banking, they require communication, and all the people who work here, they require medical facilities, education, and so on. So, these activities generate services rather than goods, and they are also called the service sector. Now, let us compare the three sectors with each other. On one hand, we have primary sector, there we practice agriculture and produce many agricultural products. Then it is mines, which was minerals, fishing, which gives us fish, and again forestry, which gives us timber. On the other hand, industries comes in secondary, and then it is tertiary sector. Tertiary sector. In tertiary sector, there is transportation, medical, educational, and banking facilities. Now, all three are interdependent on each other. If I take the first one, primary, here agriculture requires tools and equipments, tools and implements. It has to come from secondary sector. For mining, again, we require machines, and that has to come from the secondary sectors. For fishing, we require nets and fishing rods and so many other equipments. For forestry, for cutting up the trees, again, machine are required. So all these areas, we depend on the secondary sectors. Similarly, once they are produced, they have to reach final destination. They may have to be in industries or they may have to be to the customers. There it is transportation that helps. When it is manufacturing and processing work, they require raw materials, and that comes from agriculture, or that comes from mines, that comes from fishing, that comes from forestry. Then again, manufacturing and processing industries require transportation because raw material has to be brought there. Finished products have to go to the market. People have to come there to work. Then the people require medical facilities, educational, as well as banking. So we understand that all three sectors are interdependent. Now, Various production activities in primary, secondary, and tertiary sector produce in very large number of goods and services. And also, the three sectors have a large number of people working to produce these goods and services. So, the next step is to see how much goods and services are produced and how many people are working in each sector. Now, in an economy, there could be one or more sector which have dominant in terms of total production and employment, while other sectors are relatively small in size. To understand how much goods and services are produced, we need to understand GDP. Now, we have seen that economic activities are made up of primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. When we find the total money value of all the goods and services from all the three sectors, it is known as GDP. So, what is GDP and how do we count the various goods and services? GDP is a monetary measures of the market value of all final goods and services produced in a period. It is the sum of primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. That is what is GDP. Now, economists suggest that the values of goods and services should be used rather than adding up the actual numbers. And not every good or services that is produced and sold needs to be counted. Include only final goods and services. Let us understand this. Supposing our country is producing coconuts, and this is an example. We have 5,000 coconuts and they are produced and sold at 10 rupees each. What will be the total money value? It is going to be 50,000. Similarly, we have wheat and it is 10,000 kgs sold at a price of 8 rupees per kg. The value of wheat will be 80,000 rupees. So, we need to take precautions that not every goods and services produced has to be counted. We need to look and count only the final goods and services. Let's understand this with an example. Say, we have wheat 8 rupees per kg. We convert into flour, it is 10 rupees per kg now. And we make biscuits out of it. Just for our understanding, we take only 4 packets of biscuits and the value is 60 rupees. So, I should not take 8 rupees and 10 rupees. I should take only 60 because if I'm counting 8 and 10, then it will be a double or triple counting of the same things. So, this is the meaning of only the thing, final product has to be taken. So, many things that we use in our day-to-day lives, it can come from the primary sector, then secondary sector, then tertiary sector. So, only the value of the final goods or services must be taken. Let's understand this. Say, the value of final goods and services produced in each sector during a particular year provides the total products of the sector for that year. Now, let's try to understand GDP better with the help of this graph. In 1973 and 74, from the primary sector we had 2.6 lakhs, secondary sector 1.3 lakh, and tertiary sector 1.5 lakh. The total income is in the form of crores. So here the total income comes 5.4 lakh crores. This was from the three sectors. So this is the GDP in 1973-74. But if you little ahead, 2013-14, from primary sector we jump from 2.6 to 9 lakh. Secondary 1.3 lakh to 13 lakh. And tertiary sector 1.5 lakh to 35 lakhs. And the total income from all three sectors is 57 lakh crores. So this is the GDP, that is gross domestic product of our country in the year 2013-14. Now, how did we make progress and how did we give all gradually from primary to secondary and secondary to tertiary sector? For that, we have to look at our history. The world was in first stage, and it was on the first stage. That's the time the main activity of, of the people, or the occupation of the people all over the world was agriculture. So we can say in the initial stage of development, primary sector was most important sector of human activity because we knew agriculture or mining or fishing. Most people we employed in this sector, and most of the goods produced were natural products. Agriculture sector agriculture sector prospered and produced much more food than before. Buying and selling increased many times, and new professional developed like craftsmen and traders, administrators, transporters, and even army. So this was stage 1. Coming to the second stage, new methods of manufacturing were introduced. Factories came up and started expanding. People began to work in factories in large numbers, and people began to use goods produced in factories because it is available at a cheap rate. The secondary sector gradually became the most important in production as well as employment. So we can say that the secondary sector gradually became the most important in production and employment. Coming to the third stage. In third stage, that is in the last 50 years, there has been a shift from secondary sector to tertiary sector. It became the most important in terms of total production and employment. Let us understand this with the help of GDP again. Now, if you see the share of GDP in sector in 1973-74, initially it was primary sector 40. This is the percentage now. Secondary sector is 12% and tertiary sector is 48. Again, in the year 2013-14, the primary sector jumped down to 12, which was a good sign because in any developed country, the primary sector is just within 5%, and ours has come down. Secondary sector has increased from 12 to 20, and tertiary sector 48 to 68. So we can say that over the 40 years production, all the three sectors has increased, but it has increased most in the tertiary sector. Let us sum up the reason for rising importance of tertiary sector in India. Many basic services provided by government increased. When I say basic services, it includes hospitals, educational institutes, postal telegraph services, police station, courts, village administrative offices, defense, transport, banking, insurance, banks, insurance companies, etc. Second, development of agriculture and industries lead to development of services like transport and communication. As income level rise, sections of people demand more services, and that is why the malls have come up. New services developed, and these new services are, one is IT and the other one is communication, which has become an essential part of our life. Not all service sectors growing equally well. Why is it so? The reasons are: service sector in India employs different kinds of people. When I say different kind of people, that is different types of laborers. One can be unskilled, like a lot of landless laborers working in the field. Then the semi-skilled. Semi-skilled are people who can develop skills within a week and start working, like making baskets. Then there is skilled, the people who require at least a year to develop those skills. And highly skilled, like engineers, doctors, scientists, come under that category. So, limited numbers of services employ highly skilled and educated workers, and large number of services employ small shopkeepers, repair persons, transport persons, and they barely manage to earn a living and have no alternative opportunities to work. And that is the reason not all the service sectors is growing equally well. Now, let us understand, where are most of the people employed? When we say employment in the year 1970 and 71, primary sector, the primary sector had accommodated 74% of the employed people. Secondary, it was 11, and tertiary, 15. But in the year 2011 and 12, it has changed, and primary has come down to 49, which is good. Secondary is 24, and tertiary is 27. Now, why are most people employed in primary sector? The reason is not enough jobs are created in the secondary and tertiary sectors in last 40 years. Then it is production in industries increased 9 times, but employment in industries have increased only 3 times. Production services have increased 14 times, but the employment services has increased only 5 times. Not enough jobs were created in secondary and tertiary sectors in last 40 years. More than half of the workers are working in primary sector, mainly in agriculture, producing 1/4 of GDP. And the secondary and tertiary sectors produce 4/5 of produce and employ less than half the people. So, what is unemployment? Unemployment is a situation where people of working age are willing to work at the going wages but do not get jobs is known as unemployment. So, what is the government doing about? So the government introduced National Rural Employment Guarantee Act that was in 2005. Under this act, the people who are able to and are in need of work are guaranteed 100 days of employment in a year by the government. It was started in the villages of 200 districts and has now been extended to villages in over 625 districts. 1/3 of the total work is reserved for women, so it has benefited the country immensely. Then it is underemployment. Underemployment is a situation in which people are apparently working, but all of them work less than their potential. Say a graduate or postgraduate, and he is doing the work of a bus conductor. Then we will say that he is underemployed. Then comes disguised unemployment. Disguised unemployment is a kind of unemployment in which there are people who are visibly employed but are actually unemployed. In such a situation, more people are engaged in a work than required. Like in the agriculture sector, nearly 50% of the population is engaged, whereas this work can be done by 5% of the population. And 45% of the people are in villages and into agriculture because they don't have any other jobs. Even if this 45% comes out and get into some other work, all work will comfortably go on in the country and the production will not decrease. So, this will be referred to as disguised unemployment because in a developed country like US, 2% of the population into agriculture. Why does disguised unemployment not help to enhance the productivity of the country? The reason is, let us sum up. More than half of the workers in the country are working in the primary sector, mainly in agriculture, producing only a quarter of the GDP. In contrast to this, the secondary and tertiary sectors produce 3/4 of the produce, whereas they employ less than half the people. If we move a few people out from the agricultural sector, production will not be affected. These people are disguised unemployed and are not productive assets for the country. Now, how can employment be increased in both rural and urban areas? The answer is education. Education can create employment in urban as well as rural areas. Second one is the vocational training. Vocational training in the tertiary sector, we can see here, vocational training is the training particular skill. That skill will give them immense jobs and immediately they will be able to avail jobs in vocational training, like a computer DTP course. So vocational training also creates massive employment. Then promoting allied activities along with agriculture, something like horticulture. Horticulture is growing fruits and vegetables. Pisciculture is fish farming, that is, developing fishes in tanks and selling it. Many of them export in our country through financial assistance from banks. So banks have a role to play. Promotion of small scale industries and self help groups. In our country, we have plenty small scale industries, and that is an asset of the country. It is easy to start. Banking in rural areas to help in the growth of primary sector and ultimately create employment. The reason is this: poor people in the rural areas take money from jamindars and they always remain in debt. So only when the banks intervenes in these rural areas, the people will be helped out and they can become self-employed. Programs like NREGA and NRLM generate employment. So there are ways in which employment can be increased in the country. Now, coming to the next part, and that is we'll learn about organized and unorganized sectors. Talking about organized sector, what is an organized sector? It is an enterprise registered by the government and follow its rules and regulations. The terms of the employment are regular and assured, and it is called organized because it follows formal procedures. The good thing about this enterprise is that there is security of jobs, there is security of employment. There are fixed number of hours, and once the time is out, come out and go home. Workers are paid overtime if they work more, and they also get benefits such as payment during holidays, provident fund and pension on retirement, gratuity. Gratuity is the big amount that is given to a person once he retires from a job. Generally, 20% of what he has earned. Then medical benefits and safe working environment. Now, let's understand what is an unorganized sector. An unorganized sector constitutes small and scattered commercial units, and our country has plenty of this, which are outside the control of the government. There are no rules and regulations in the unorganized sector, and jobs here are low paid and irregular. Employment is not secure in this sector. So when I talk about unorganized sector, first of all, it is an enterprise not registered by the government. They have rules and regulations, but these are not followed at all. Terms of employment are not regular and not assured work. Employment is not secured, and workers can be asked to leave without any reason. There is no fixed number of hours, and they are not paid overtime. They also do not get benefits like payment during holidays, provident fund, gratuity, medical benefits, safe working environment, pension on retirement, and paid leaves. So, out of 475 million persons employed in India, 82.74% work in unorganized sector. Now we are clear why people like to work in the organized sector. The reason are workers enjoy security of employment and are expected to work only a fixed number of hours. Workers get several benefits from the employers. They get paid leave, payment during holidays, provident fund, gratuity, pension on retirement. Workers get medical benefits and also enjoy facilities like safe working environment, clean drinking water, etc. Why are workers exploited in unorganized sector? The reason is employment opportunity in the organized sector have been expanding very slowly. So there are very few job opportunities. Many organized sector enterprises are found in the unorganized sector, and the reason behind is to evade tax, refuse laws that protect laborers. Since 1990s, large number of workers are losing jobs in the organized sector. Now let's come to the final part of the chapter and understand the difference between the public sector and private sector. Economic activity on the basis of nature of ownership. So let us understand the difference between public sector and private sector. In the public sector, ownership of assets and delivery of services lies with the government. The motive behind running a public sector is welfare of the public. Say, for example, the post office and even the railway, they come under public sector. Then it is private sector. Here the ownership of assets and delivery of services lies with the private individuals or companies. So, in simple words, public sector is owned and managed by government. Private sectors are owned and managed by private individuals. So, what is the motive here? Motive is profit. We have all heard of Tata's and Reliance. They are the example of private sectors. Now, why is it important for public sector to focus on the some areas? Several things are needed by the society, but which the private sector will not provide at a reasonable cost, like construction of roads, bridges, railways, harbors, generating electricity, dam, irrigation, etc. Some areas need spending large sum of money, which is beyond the capacity of private sector. Collecting money from thousands of people who do use these facilities is not easy, and it is done by the government. Even if private sector provides these things, they would charge a high rate for their use. So, government has to undertake heavy spending and ensure that these facilities are available for everyone. There are some activities by which government has to support the private sector, or they may not continue their production or business. Say, for example, government produces and supplies electricity at rates at which these industries can't afford. Government bears a part of the cost, buys wheat and rice from farmers at fair price, stores it in godowns and sells at lower prices to consumer through ration shops. Then providing health and education facilities is the government's primary responsibility, like elementary education, safe drinking water, housing facilities for poor, food and nutrition facilities. To conclude, government will also take care of the poorest and the most ignored regions of the country. through increased spending in such areas. So, with this, I conclude the chapter. Thank you so much.